welcome. Let's get started here. My name is Daniel Shaw. I'm a doula and a co-founder of the Virtual Death Doula Network, and with me are the other co-founders and doulas, Andrea Sugar and Emily Frost. And today we're going to be talking to you about being frozen or stuck in various situations associated with death. And before we get into that, if you've got, like we said, we've muted everybody. Feel free to, chime in the chat at any point if you have anything to say. And we're actually going to be doing this a little bit different than we've done in the past, where we're going to have a question to consider and reflect on after each of us is done talking about our particular topic. And then we'll still have our Q&A at the end like we normally do, but just, a slight change as far as that goes. And to sort of get us into the same space and help us focus and ground, I'm going to lead us in a box breathing exercise before we start. That's also good if you're ever feeling anxious, to help with that. And we'll include a link with more information about that in the resources that we send out after this is done, like we normally do. So the way box breathing works is sort of controlled breathing in for a few seconds, holding for a few seconds, breathing out for a few seconds, holding for a few seconds. And I'll just guide that, and we'll go through a few rounds of that. You can close your eyes if you like, get comfortable, but let's do this. Let's box breathe together. So settling in, breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. All right. Thanks again, everybody, for being here. The topics that we're going to be going through today, I'm going to be leading off talking about feeling frozen in the face of death, acceptance, denial, that sort of thing. Andrea is going to come after that and talk about being stuck with stuff, trapped and paralyzed by physical belongings. And then Emily will follow up and talk about how doulas can help with all of this. So yeah, I guess I'm starting off. So the question I'm going to pose to you to consider for reflection at the end of what I've done is have you struggled with accepting a death or an impending death? And I'm going to talk to you about when I struggled with accepting a death or an impending death. So my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1988, and I was a high school freshman at the time. And she received treatment and went into remission in under a year. And the experience registered with me, of course, but I didn't allow it to significantly impact me. We were fortunate in that she did, go into remission at the time, but I was ignoring the issue, and the remission coupled nicely with me ignoring it. I was, being frozen in the face of situations like that, that we're emotionally incapable of handling, is a very common response. And I was starting my senior year when the cancer returned, and my parents did their best to shield me from the whole experience, but it included not talking about the feelings it brought up in me, but basically just not talking about it, or just talking about it as little as possible. But it was impossible not to be aware of some of the more obvious physical manifestations of the treatment she was going through this time. She had a double mastectomy, and she lost all her hair because of the heavy course of chemotherapy that she was going through. And my mother, she did her best not to show the pain that she was going through. And when the cancer first reappeared, it was still relatively early in progression. It wasn't, so it wasn't anything to be taken lightly, but it wasn't a hard and fast death sentence at that point yet either. And I handled the whole thing the way I handled any other difficulty I had to up in that point in my life, which was to ignore it and pretend it was a non-issue. And that did require a certain amount of detachment from my mother. I didn't really know what I was doing. All I knew was that she was hurting and potentially facing death, and that made me very uncomfortable. So while I was completing my senior year, my mother was fighting for her life. And I struggled to accept that this was happening to her. I was good at putting forth a facade of being okay. And because of this, everyone assumed that I was handling the situation. In reality, I felt ignored. I was confused. I could see that my mother was getting sicker, and I would have benefited from talking about what was happening inside of me with someone. Of course, that said, I don't know if I was capable of discussing the emotions that were welling up at that point. And since I felt ignored on top of that, I basically slid into a year-long denial about what was happening around me. I knew my mother was dying, and I actively refused to accept it. And I was speaking at my graduation in June of that year. And as the date approached, my mother would ask me to share what I was going to be speaking about, but I didn't, because she would be there. She had to be there, and she wasn't there. And I wish I had taken the time to share with her what I was going to be speaking about, among many other things, but I couldn't. I was frozen in anticipation of her dying, and my inability to accept her impending death caused me to lose out on countless opportunities during that final year together to strengthen the love between us. And I've worked hard since then to accept that, as perfectly imperfect as I was navigating that final year of my mother's life. I did the best I could. I'm fortunate now that I'm open to talking and sharing about my mother. I benefit from speaking out loud to my mother as well. I mean, I reached acceptance of my mother's death 27 years after she died. So there is no time limit on grief and healing, and acceptance of this sort is always possible. And for me to reach this acceptance required a great deal of work and support from others. It started with me learning how to discuss my emotions. I mean, I went into therapy and discovered that I could only identify a handful of emotions at that point. It was a bit discouraging, but in retrospect, that was completely necessary to start the healing process and learn to accept my emotions. I mean, that was where I was at. And since then, I've made taking care of myself a priority. Meditation and other mindfulness practices have been instrumental in coming to acceptance. I've learned to be open to talking about this experience and other similar painful experiences as a means of moving and processing challenging emotions. So learning how to communicate these difficult emotions and being okay with them as they arose was also beneficial in my learning to practice acceptance. And that is my being stuck and frozen in the face of death. So would anybody like to share similar experiences of their own? You don't have to. You can, if you want to raise your hand and speak out loud, that's great. If you want to throw something in the chat, that's great too. I'll give folks a minute or two to chime in, or if it's obvious nobody is, we'll move on to the next. But if you do, and again, we're going to be talking more about this at the end also, so our Q&A at the end also. So this is your opportunity to be stuck and frozen about death.
I see Shelly has her hand up. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Shelly. Go ahead.
Oh, she's still muted. Hold on, Shelly.
Can you do it, Daniel? It won't unmute.
She's done. She's good now.
Am I unmuted now? Okay.
You're good.
All right. I'm completely opposite Daniel, which is frustrating. I've lost people very close to me, but they were all seniors, and it's an acceptable death to me. And that's the problem. People think I'm kind of cold about death. In reality, I think I'm just realistic about death. And I've not lost someone young that was terribly painful. I've lost people, but people always view me as just cold-hearted, I guess. I have a different opinion about death than most of my friends. And I try to get people to understand that I'm not afraid of death and I accept death. And honestly, I'm really committed to peaceful death, comfort death. by the time I lose a loved one, a dear friend that I took care of for a year, I'm ready for them to be gone. And so that my lack of emotion, my lack of dealing with feelings is perceived to be cold-hearted. I've dealt with them. I'm just beyond it now. And the only passion I have, honestly, is to allow for a peaceful, voluntary death.
Wow. Thanks, Shelley. That's I understand that. The way when I with that sort of thing, I have a similar, I think, with now a similar sort of approach to death, because it is everybody dies, and sort of we all have our own means of accepting and moving through it and everything like that. And I feel like sort of pushback of the sort that you're saying is more, that's everybody who's in that space is working through their own emotions and attitudes towards death. And when they're talking, they're sort of projecting out their own beliefs, and that's where they're at, and that's totally fine with that also, and that's fantastic. So thank you so much for that.
And I'd just like to add, there is no right or wrong way to grieve or to make peace with death. And I think that where you're coming from is lovely, and I'm so happy that works for you. And it's a very peaceful place to be.
Thank you.
Shelley, I can really relate to you. I have been accused of, or people have been perplexed by my attitude when someone dies. To be honest, even some family members that have died, and I haven't been that emotional. I've of course felt emotions and felt sadness around some things, but I've been okay. And I think that is very strange to a lot of people. So yeah, Andrea's right in that there's no correct way to be if someone dies. It's just, just you are who you are, and you have the thoughts that you have, and it doesn't mean that we're cold-hearted or don't love people or don't feel the feelings.
Awesome. Okay. Anybody else? All right.
I'll go.
Okay.
I have the opposite, more like a young, fearful side of things. So with my parents passing in August, both of them together, in an accident of drowning, it's really hard to accept it and feel relaxed about it. But it usually only happens when I talk about it or say those words. Outside of that, I'm feeling a lot better. But when I say that sentence, it's really hard. So I feel like it's unresolved, but other days I feel good. That's pure shaking when I talk about it. So yeah, I feel unresolved right now.
I want to commend you first for being brave and sharing, because it is brave to say those words. I lost both of my parents within a 4-month period. And like you, I had challenges. Some days were fine, and some days I was utterly paralyzed. And it's also hard to find that balance of being okay with the returning of joy. And it is okay for you to feel joy in the midst of mourning. That's something that's very important. It's necessary even. And so where you're at is a completely normal place to be. You're working your way through it, and it doesn't mean that you don't have peace with it. It just means you're moving through your process at your own time.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I'm gonna ask anybody else to hold their stuff until the end now and move on to Andrea so that she can talk to you about being stuck in the face of some more physical type items that can freeze you up and trap you. Andrea?
Okay, I am Andrea Sugar. I am one of the co-founders and doulas at the Virtual Death Doula Network. I'm going to talk today about attachment and grief, particularly what am I going to do with all of this stuff? And the question that I'd like to pose to you for reflection, just to think about or maybe answer is, have you ever felt trapped or paralyzed by stuff, by material objects? Oftentimes there are objects of the beloved to tend to and live with following a death. These material reminders can be familiar and comforting, but they can also be upsetting and challenging, bringing up a whole multitude of emotions ranging from comfort to distress. It is completely normal to feel an increased attachment to material objects left from the death of a loved one. It's normal to have a wide range of feelings that go with these attachments. I'm going to share my personal experience of feeling utterly paralyzed by my parents' furniture and personal items. I'm coming up on the 6th anniversary of my parents' deaths this year. I have a room in my house that is filled with pieces of their furniture, my mother's wedding dress, and other countless items that have all been laid to rest in my spare bedroom. These objects have taken over the room, not only in occupying the space, but occupying a huge emotional block within me as well. I feel frozen when I go into this room. I scan the room, my eyes and my heart rest on each familiar item and the memories they evoke, and then I hurry to do whatever I'm doing in there and just get out. More than once, it's been suggested to me that I need to organize this space and make room in there so that I can use my spare room as something other than a storage space for emotionally charged objects that I don't actually use or need. I feel frozen when it comes to that room and the objects in it. I haven't been able to touch them very much. I haven't been able to think about how to rearrange them or even let go of them. In particular, there's a giant marble-topped dresser that was my mother's, and it haunts me. She loved that dresser, and I have memory after memory of her standing over it getting ready. The way it smelled when she would open a drawer, the sweet scent of a sachet would waft out. This was my childhood, my whole life up until she died. How interesting that an object, a seemingly innocuous object, can hold so much, can elicit so much pain, fear, and emotion. For the longest time, I've been afraid to even think of letting go of this item and the others that accompany it. Yes, afraid. Afraid that I might lose what's left of the feeling that the presence of my mom and dad that I've imbued into these objects, afraid that I might betray my parents if I released any of these beloved objects. So I have been frozen in fear, guilt, sadness, and frustration. I love the familiar echoes these objects sound for me, but I also want my room back. I want freedom, space. I finally made an appointment with someone to come in and help me organize the room and create the space needed to have an appraiser also come and check out each of these pieces. I made the decision to let go, and it felt really good. Scary, but good. The idea of clearing this space, both internally and externally, felt almost like free falling. Despite the unexpected and swirling emotions, I was able to list all the major furniture pieces on my local social media outlets, and I am ready to sell them for real. This is a huge breakthrough for me. I am excited about the possibility of having space to recreate the spare room and to let go of some big things that are weighing me down, both literally and figuratively. Now I feel like I can't clear the space quickly enough. The emotional cord that had been so tightly gripped between us is now a mere lingering piece of thread, and this change feels exciting and strange. Right after I made peace with the idea of getting rid of these items and making plans to sell or donate them, a wildfire ripped through my town. I was forced to evacuate quickly with no warning, leaving my home with nothing except a few clothes. Once I was safely evacuated, I began to digest the situation. I was in shock. There was a very real possibility that I was going to lose my house and everything in it. I started crying hysterically because my mother's wedding band was in the house, as well as all of the photos and everything. Pretty much everything I have left from my family was in my house, and I had to reconcile the idea that I might lose it all. I had to sit with the idea that everything I am materially attached to, including the items I had just worked so hard to detach from, may be destroyed. I was forced to examine my relationship to the items, particularly those belonging to my parents, and to come to terms that these material objects do not equate to my relationship with my parents or my meaningful memories of them. I was being held hostage by my white-knuckled grip of these items that were no longer serving me. I recognize that I hold the love, memories, and dear stuff within me, rather than within these external objects, no matter how familiar they are. I realize that the love I hold within me is enough, more than enough. And finding the love inside is what helped me find peace, healing, and movement in the midst of tragedy. So now I want to pose to anyone, has anyone ever experienced anything like this? Have you ever felt trapped or paralyzed by stuff, by objects? And that's okay if nobody has. You can always put it in the chat or raise your hand. Okay. Well, if anybody has anything that comes up, please feel free to add it to the chat, and we will have a Q&A at the end. And we will go ahead and move along to Emily.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. Such a great question. And one that like I feel like isn't asked a lot of us, like, have you been trapped by stuff? Or the yeah, Vivian says whole storage full. It's just such a uniting thing, I think. Well, I'm going to talk about firstly how people might not think that they need a doula initially, and when they do realize maybe they can come to me or a doula, anyone, how we would get the train moving if they are feeling paralyzed or frozen in any sort of situation. So as a doula, oftentimes people are really curious naturally about what I do. Usually when I say I'm a death doula, it kind of opens the floodgates of questions, or someone is just completely shutting down, like, I don't want to talk about that with you, you're weird, get away from me. But a lot of times they are asking me a bunch of questions, and I think that really highlights like how often we get opportunities to talk about death and dying, which is not many that I've experienced anyway. So anyway, they're curious and they want to know how I can assist a loved one or them, but they usually don't think it's necessary to employ me at that time. They say something like, oh yeah, when the time comes, I'd love to have your help, or, you know, one day I could use your service, or my loved one can use your service. And sometimes I ask them, usually playfully with a smile, so what is the right time then? When is that magical time? And that tends to open the conversation up more, because a lot of people don't really know that doulas can enter at different times in life and help with different things. So it's kind of an educational opportunity for them and for me to learn from them. Because many people, particularly in the West, they don't have many opportunities to, as I said, talk about death, and it's not consciously in people's minds very much if they're not actively at the end of the life or going through a loss or something like that. And yet the fear of death is always underlying. There's this anxiety, there's this pushing away of death instead of bringing it close to us to think about and to ponder. And it's that kind of has the effect of when something does happen, we're like a deer in headlights, we're paralyzed, we're frozen, we don't know what to do. So when I ask someone, well, okay, well, what are your wishes at the end of life, or what would you want to do with your body? I usually get the reaction of like, what? I don't know. Like, why are you asking me that? That's so crazy. But in reality, we are all going to die, of course, and we don't know when that's going to be. And talking about these things can really help to plan for an ideal end, or at least an end in which one's wishes are taken care of and heard and honored. So how can we start to talk about it? Say someone has taken the step to book my services. I would first meet the client, and the first thing I do is invite a gentle questioning session. And what do I mean by gentle questioning? It's kind of like an interview, but a very, very light-hearted / serious one. It's kind of difficult to put a finger on, but broad questions such as, what led you to contact me as a death doula? That is a doorway that can be addressed in different ways, maybe very heavy ones, or maybe you have to dig a little deeper over time. But that'll give me an idea of where to start with this person. How deep can I gain access to their discomfort with death and dying? I'll invite the client to share what they're hoping to gain from our time together, and maybe a bit about their history in relation to the subject of death. And again, this can go really deep, really fast, or just stay on the surface level for a while. The point is not to push. Even if I can see like pretty clearly a solution, the point is not to be right or to fix this person. It's just to kind of ease into the comfort and really get to the heart of what they need from a doula. So sometimes all it takes is creating a safe space, a non-judgmental, trusting bubble for this person to open up and unravel their curiosity surrounding death and dying. And holding space is a way to create this atmosphere of trust and calm and peace. So what do I mean by holding space? Holding space, if you haven't heard of that term, it's a really simple concept. It's basically just being physically, mentally, and emotionally present with someone and putting your focus on someone to support them as they feel their feelings. So I like to think of it as being like an empty glass of water. Sorry, no, you can't have an empty glass of water. An empty glass and their feelings are the water filling up the glass. Or being like an empty sheet of paper and their feelings and words are filling your piece of paper up. So a lot of times, like most of the time when you're having a conversation, right, the person is saying things and your mind just naturally is coming up with things to say in relation to what they're saying, is coming up with a solution to a problem, is coming up with advice to offer the person. And that's just kind of like a natural way to communicate with people. But when you're holding space, you're just trying to be kind of an empty listener. And of course, you're absorbing what they're saying, but you're not putting any of yourself onto them. You're not putting any of your opinions. You're just actively listening. I did write down some bullet points here. Where are they? Let's see. Not jumping into problem solving mode. So that's very important and something that I tend to try to do a lot, and I have to catch myself. Not centering yourself and being open to whatever emotions come up. So that can be pretty scary. Actually, you have to be open to people crying. You have to be open to people getting kind of agitated or angry or mad or anything, and understand that those feelings aren't necessarily anything to do with you or what you're doing there. They're just coming out. And so being okay with whatever comes out, and to an extent, of course, you shouldn't be okay with like being abused or anything like that, but that is what holding space is. And I quickly want to touch on the fact that you can also hold space for yourself. So you can be a witness to your own thoughts and feelings without getting in the way, getting into a judgmental headspace. So it's essentially the same as like a meditation practice, maybe mindfulness. So just practice emptying your thoughts and being present with yourself, and maybe a thought comes up and you let that enter your consciousness and acknowledge it, but don't try to fix it. Don't try to judge it. Don't try to, go into problem solving mode. And I often encourage the client to engage in self-inquisitive practices like that. And journaling helps, free writing helps. I like to do what I call like automatic writing, which can be just writing down like anything at all. Might not even make sense, might be even like made up words. And I like to do like automatic drawing as well. So it can be just a blank sheet of paper and without judgment, just drawing whatever. And that might include words as well. But it can really help to get feelings and thoughts out that come from the deep subconscious layer of the psyche. Beyond those things, once we get to a more maybe like practical understanding of what the client needs from me, we can go on to making like an action item list, and if they're all right with that. And I just want to mention a tool that we as the Virtual Death Doula Network like to use. It's called Death Project Manager. We're also like a partner with them. So they have various products that you can buy, and we have like a partnership with them, and you can check that out. I think Daniel's going to put a link in our chat.
Yeah.
But they have really helpful, I've bought this, they call it a zine, but it's like a little booklet that you can get. It's a spiral bound notebook, and there's questions, very gentle questioning about, what you would like to happen. And there's much more practical questions as well, like, birth details and where things are in your house maybe, and like what you're going to do with your stuff, for instance. And we can use that to go through together and make sure all the boxes are ticked and everything is kind of squared away. And some people's personalities are really geared towards that. They like to see like a list of things to do and then get it done and have it all in one place. So I think that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to also say that, or remember rather, that usually I find that the simplest of activities are the most effective and powerful teachers, such as holding space, if you can call that an activity. But just a huge proponent of free writing and mindfulness and meditation. And my question I would like to pose to you all is, have you tried holding space, and did you find it difficult or uncomfortable? And have you tried holding space for yourself? And how was that for you? And that's my question. And thank you for listening.
And while people are spending some time reflecting on Emily's question, if there's anything else anybody wants to share from the previous topics, or even a topic we didn't cover, we have plenty of time now for that. I don't know if you are open to it, Vivian, but if you would like to share about your storage of stuff, we would certainly love to hear.
Yeah, I think we can transition now to the general Q&A with maybe that holding space question also included. Is that your idea, Andrea?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Awesome.
I can also touch on that because I'm a birth doula, so I'm holding space for people, or I used to. I'll have my first birth since August in February, so it'll be very interesting for me, but I haven't thought about holding space for myself. But I feel like I did that this morning with just sitting for like a 13-minute meditation, and I haven't pulled out my cushion in forever. So that was very helpful this morning. But with the storage unit, I'm just letting myself take a year, letting it sit for a year, and then I'll come to terms with it. I'm giving myself time for sure, because this is still really fresh. So I'm being patient with myself, and I'm very, very slow with my life right now. So I intend to keep it that way for another 6 months. So yeah.
Thank you. It's really heartening to hear that you are taking it slowly and listening to what you need, and not putting that pressure on yourself. And yeah, I think that's really good. And I don't think maybe most people don't do that, give themselves time. So that's very good. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely most people. I think the hardest, like doing the right thing for ourselves is so much easier to help other people with stuff like that. But when it comes to helping ourselves, we're like, no, 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 I'll push through this, I'll muscle through it or whatever. And it's really not all that helpful. Like self-care for yourself is as important, if not more important than helping others. Because if you're not in good shape, it's very, very difficult to help somebody else.
And also, I think a big part of self-care is being able to ask for help, which is oftentimes one of the hardest things to do. It took me 6 years to ask someone to help me with that spare bedroom. Even though I knew something needed to be done with it. I wasn't ready, I couldn't deal with it. And then I finally reached a point where I said, in order to take care of myself, I have to take care of this. But I also said, I can't take care of this myself. I couldn't do it. And still I need help with it. There's still drawers filled with photo albums that I'm going to have someone come over and help me go through because it's painful when I touch them, even though it also feels good. So I think that part of self-care also is knowing it's okay to ask for help for these things. Shelley, is it okay if I read yours out loud? Okay. Shelley has a really beautiful share. She was a death doula. She said, I was a death doula before I knew what that was. I burnt out and never knew to make time for myself. Now I face a serious diagnosis and I'm trying hard to find ways to make sure my family will understand and follow my wishes. I am also very actively trying to advance right to die in New York State. So Shelley, first of all, thank you for that brave share and for being vulnerable, because that is the bravest thing we can do. But you make several really good points. First of all, it's very easy to burn out if you don't care for yourself in any capacity, be it a death doula, be it a wife, a mother, a sister, a friend. In any capacity, if we don't take the time to care for ourselves and hold space, can absolutely burn out. And I think that what you're working to do to find ways for your family to understand and follow your wishes is a really beautiful, proactive way to be. Obviously, of course, if you ever need any assistance, we can find you a doula in your state, or we would be more than happy to help you since we are virtual. We can come up with a lot of different ways to kind of assist with families. A big part of what we do is grief and death anxiety support, and not just for someone who is dying, but for their family, to help the family understand the dying process, particularly if a lot of times we've reached a place where the person who's dying has made peace with it, but their family has not. And so we try to find a way to meet in the middle there so everybody can have some comfort in a potentially uncomfortable situation.
And as far as the right to die stuff goes, I'm fortunate enough to live in Oregon, which pioneered that. And I got to spend some time volunteering with End of Life Choices Oregon. I'm going to put the link to that in there and offer if you ever want to pick my brain or have put in touch with somebody there. That's the organization that basically helps folks here in Oregon navigate the right to die laws that we have. So I'm throwing that out there in case that is beneficial.
I think it may have been Vivian, but if I'm wrong, please let me know. But somebody mentioned that they wanted to talk about, oh, I'm sorry, it was Intaba. I apologize. Intaba said, I hope we'll have a chance to talk about unresolved grief of someone we had a problematic relationship with. That is absolutely something we can talk about. We actually just did an entire death salon on that topic. Intaba, I don't know if you want to type any more in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself and
Yeah, sure. I'm unmuted now.
Okay, great. Well, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry I missed that salon. Are there any archives? Is there any way to listen to it?
Yes, it is on our YouTube channel, and we can, Daniel maybe can.
I'll put the
throw
link in, yeah.
Okay, that'd be great.
that.
Thank you. Yeah, so I won't go into a lot of detail then. I had a very problematic relationship with both of my parents. Both of my parents had very severe mental illnesses. In the case of one of them, it played out with a lot of abuse and neglect. And so when my parents were dying, it was very difficult for me to feel close to them or any sense of resolution. So it's been, let's see, I think about 10 years since they both died. They both died within very short time of one another. And I'm working diligently in my practice to try to understand and forgive, in particular in reference to my mom. But this is still really present for me on a daily basis. And just wondering if you all have any insights that you'd like to convey to me. Thank you.
I'm going to take this one because you and I have had a very similar experience. I lost both my parents within a 4-month period, and I had a incredibly challenging and difficult relationship with my mother. And it took me a long time to forgive her, honestly, for a lot of things. And it took her dying for me to forgive her. And then it took about another year or two. And it took me going through a box of old letters that I saw that she'd saved, from different people. And in this, I realized, that my mom was suffering to some extent, and that she was doing the very best she could for who she was. And that is sort of where I found some peace, is understanding that she really wanted to do the very best she could, and her best was what it was, and it wasn't always great for me or the people around her, but that didn't take away from the big beautiful heart she had, even though sometimes that big beautiful heart felt like it was crushing you. So I think that forgiving yourself for having feelings about this, I know for me, I felt very conflicted that I was so angry at my mom even when she died. That was a big deal for me. So once I allowed those feelings, I said, you know what, I am angry. And my mom did a lot of really shitty things to me and to other people. And that's real. But it's also, it doesn't take away the things that were good. And I was able to find some peace within myself and understanding that she did the best she could. And now I have a chance to make peace with myself and with her. I speak to her out loud. I talked about it with her, and maybe that sounds kind of crazy, but that really helped. And I just said, Mom, I love you, but man, you really made me crazy. And sometimes that made our relationship hard, but please know, I love you.
No, that's nice. I have moments of feeling like that, but I took it out on, there was so many years of self-loathing from the abuse. It's really very difficult to resolve. Yeah, so I'm still in process, I guess, but thank you. It's really good to hear words of encouragement.
And it is a process, and that's, I would really encourage you to be gentle with yourself, and there's no time that it takes to get through this. And there are still times where I do feel angry at my mom, and then I remind myself of who she was as a person, and that she did the best she could.
Yeah, I wish I could feel angry at her. Mostly I just feel angry with myself.
So maybe going back to what Emily was suggesting in doing a free write, that might be something that may be pretty cathartic and helpful to just sort of let that stuff out on paper and see what comes out, because you may find that there's a little nugget or even a couple words that you weren't expecting that kind of open up maybe a new opening for processing this and learning about it.
Okay, thank you so much.
And as always, please feel free to reach out to us at all if you have any questions or you want to chat.
I would add to that too, if you're open to a visual art practice, having these things in your mind and just having a blank sheet of paper, having some pencils or some colored pencils, some paint, and just seeing what comes out in a visual way, if you're into that. Do we have any other questions or comments or confessions?
All right, I think we're gonna wrap this up then. Thank you all so much for coming here and joining with us and for the shares. It's been a really, I felt a lovely salon today. It's been great. Thank everybody who's spoken up and the people who haven't also contributed by bringing your energy as well. And yeah, it's been fantastic. Thanks everybody. Andrea, Emily, wanna?
If you're not already subscribed, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Emily.
If you're not already subscribed to our newsletter, that's how you'll get our latest news and also new links to our future death salons. We have them every month, so we would love to have you at the next one. And Andrea, do you want to say about our PayPal and donations?
So we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and donations are really what keep us going because we serve everyone regardless of socioeconomic status. And so any donation goes into a fund to help clients that aren't able to access care without the extra help. And we are committed to helping people worldwide. We're an international nonprofit. So any little bit helps and we appreciate it. And if you feel like sharing that, that also really helps. And again, thank you for being present. We appreciate your time and your energy.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So long. Thank you, everybody.